Hello and welcome to the next edition of the BriefingsDirect Voice of AI Innovation podcast series. I'm Dana Gardner, Principal Analyst at Inter Arbor Solutions, your host and moderator for this ongoing discussion on the latest insights into artificial intelligence and strategies. As businesses and IT strategists plan their path to a new normal, throughout the COVID-19 pandemic and recovery, AI and data science are proving impactful and indispensable. By leveraging the latest tools and gaining data-driven inferences, architects and analysts are both effectively managing the pandemic response and giving more people better ways to improve their path to the new normal. Stay with us here and now as we examine how AI is the indispensable pandemic response team member for helping businesses reduce risk of failure and innovate with confidence. To learn more about the analytics solutions and methods that support advantageous reactivity amid unprecedented change, we're joined by two experts. Please join me in welcoming Artie Garg, Head of Advanced AI Solutions and Technologies, Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. Welcome to BriefingsDirect, Artie.
Good morning.
We're also here with Glenn Bowden, Chief Technologist for AI and Data, HPE Point Next Services. Welcome, Glenn.
Thanks, Dana.
Artie, let's start with you. Why should we be looking to data science and AI to help at a time when there's not much of a historical record to rely on? It seems that we're in a time when people are in uncharted waters in dealing with the complexities of a world dealing from this novel coronavirus pandemic. Why can we do better without having a historical record to deal with?
Well, actually, because we don't have a historical record, I think data science and AI are proving to be particularly useful right now in understanding this new disease and how we might potentially better treat it or manage it or find a vaccine for it. And that's because at this moment in time, raw data that are being collected from medical offices and through research labs are really the foundation of what we know about the pandemic. And this is an interesting time because when you know a disease, medical studies and medical research is often conducted in a very controlled way where you try to control the environment in which you gather data. But unfortunately, right now, we can't do that. We don't have the time to wait. And so instead, AI, particularly some of the more advanced AI techniques, can be helpful in dealing with unstructured data or data of multiple different formats. And so it's becoming very important in the medical research community to use AI to better understand the disease. And it's really enabling some unexpected and very fruitful collaborations from what I'm seeing.
Glenn, how about from your perspective? Are you also seeing this as a time when AI is doing more, even though we're in uncharted waters?
Absolutely. So the benefits of something like machine learning, for example, which is a subset of AI, is that it's very good at handling many, many features. So if you're a human being approaching these projects, there's only so many things you can keep in your head at once in terms of the variables you need to consider when building a model in order to understand something. When you apply ML to that instead, you're able to cope with millions or billions of those features simultaneously and then simulate models using that information. So it really does add the power of a million scientists to the same problem that we were trying to face alone before.
And is this AI benefit something that we can apply in many different avenues or areas for corporations? Are we looking at planning around our operations, or is this more R&D? Is it both? Where is it actually getting traction more than other areas? Artie?
So I think that there's two ways that I would answer the question of how AI is and what's happening with the use of AI in response to the pandemic. One is actually to the practice of data science itself. So one of the things that's happening right now is that data scientists are collaborating very directly with medical science research and learning how to incorporate subject matter expertise into data science models. This has actually been one of the challenges that is preventing AI, businesses from adopting AI in more complex applications, but we're in real time developing some of the best practices that will help us use AI in a lot of domains. In addition, a lot of businesses are considering the use of AI to help them manage their businesses, manage their operations going forward. Things like using computer vision to ensure that social distancing is happening maybe with their workforce or other types of compliance with whatever might happen and we might be asked to do in the future.
And Glenn, for you, do you think that the pressures of the current environment are allowing AI and data science benefits to impact more people? We've been talking about the democratization of AI for some time. Is this happening more now than in the past?
Absolutely. And that's both a positive and a negative in some ways. So the data around the pandemic has been made available to the general public. So anyone looking at news sites and looking at newspapers and just generally consuming information from public channels are now accessing things from Johns Hopkins University, for example, who have a steady stream of it. But those data sources are existing all over the place and are being thrown at a public that are now beginning to become more data savvy and more data literate. As they consume it and as they add their context to it, they get a personal point of view, which is then pushed back into the community again, because as you get data sent to you, you want to share it back. So the ability to have all of this wide public field, not only from the universities and the scholars, but from the general public who are now public data scientists, I think that's creating a huge movement where there's the desire to have the amount of transparency that we have around this disease applied to other areas of our lives, but also to be able to take the data from that in raw format and manipulate it and use it to our own ends.
Artie, anything to offer on the democratization trend?
I actually agree with many of the points that Glenn made, is that one, it is exposing people and making data available to pretty much anyone through these amazing data portals that a lot of communities and research institutions like Johns Hopkins University have made available to the public. And this is great because it's allowing a lot of people to participate. It can also be a challenge because, as I mentioned, when you're dealing with complex problems, you really do need to be able to incorporate subject matter expertise into the models that you're building and into how you interpret the data that you're analyzing. And so unfortunately, we've already seen, I think, in some cases, blog posts or other types of analyses that have gotten a lot of attention in social media, but later found to be not taking into account things that people who have spent their careers studying epidemiology, for example, might know and understand.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've just seen some publishing this week where people are calling it a misinformation pandemic, but businesses need good, hard inference and information and data to operate, to be responsible, to make the right decisions, to reduce their risk. So what are some of the obstacles that people have to overcome in order to make data science and AI useful and integral, given that they need good information and data more than ever in a crisis situation? Let's start with you, Artie.
Yeah, I think one of the things that is sometimes underappreciated, and Glenn can definitely speak to this in some of the work he's done with our customers, is that foundation, a data platform, having their data managed and made accessible and contextualized so that you can make stronger decisions based on it. And I think that's one of the things that's going to be critical. It always is critical in leveraging data to make better decisions. And it can be a larger investment than people might expect to do that, but it really pays off if you want to be a data-driven organization.
Glenn, obstacles that people need to overcome in order to make the most use of AI these days?
So there's a plethora of obstacles. I think the one that kind of Artie is referring to and that is being made more and more obvious by what we're seeing in the pandemic side of things is the bit that we don't focus on, and that's things like the provenance of the data. So where does the data come from? That doesn't always get examined. And as we talked about a second ago when we were talking about how the context might not be there, all of that can be gleaned from knowing the source of the data. And the source of the data tends to come from the metadata that surrounds it. So the metadata is the data that describes the data. So it could be when it was generated, who generated it, what it was generated for, and who the intended consumer is. All of that could be part of the metadata. Organizations need to start looking at data sources because that's ultimately how you determine the trustworthiness of that data and therefore the value of that data. Now, it could be that you're taking data from external sources to aggregate with internal sources. And so the data platform piece that Artie was referring to, there's a piece there about bringing those data pieces together. It shouldn't just be you're going to your own data silos and you're treating them as you've always treated them. It's about aggregation of those data pieces. But you need to be able to trust those sources in order to be able to bring them together in a meaningful way. So understanding the provenance of the data, understanding where it came from and why it was produced is key to knowing how to bring it together in that data platform.
And along the lines of necessity being the mother of invention, it seems to me that a crisis is also an opportunity to change culture in ways that are difficult otherwise. Are we seeing, if not obstacles, are we seeing accelerants given the current environment to the use of AI and data? And how is that working? Also start with you, Artie.
I'll answer that question from two different perspectives. One is certainly the research community. I'll sort of look back to that because the fact that there are medical researchers and there are many of them doing a lot of work, I think is becoming more prominent in people's eyes right now. I can tell you from working with researchers in this community and, knowing many of them, that the medical research community has been interested and excited to adopt advanced AI techniques, big data techniques into their research. So it's not that they're doing it for the first time, but I definitely am seeing an acceleration of the desire and the necessity to do that, to make use of these sort of non-traditional techniques for analyzing their data. And I think that it's unlikely that they're going to go back to not using those for other types of studies as well. In addition, I think you're definitely going to see AI utilized and become more part of our new normal in the future, if you will. We are already hearing from customers and from vendors about wanting to use things like computer vision, as I mentioned before, to monitor social distancing, or potentially just disseminating things that are in practice maybe in places like airports where thermal scanning might already be used, seeing it a little more where people might be interested in using that in retail. So I think that some techniques, some AI solutions will become a more common part of our day-to-day lives.
Lynn, a more receptive environment to AI now?
I think so, yes. So the general public are particularly becoming more used to the fact that AI is playing a huge role in this. So the mystery around it is beginning to fade away, and it's becoming far more accepted, the fact that AI is something that can be trusted. And it does have its limitations in terms of it's not going to turn into Terminator and take over the world, which if you talk to the general public before that was a fear. So the fact that they're seeing it more in their day-to-day lives, and they're actually beginning to depend on the results of AI, at least from the understanding of the pandemic piece, that drives that exception. When you start looking at how it'll enable people to get back to somewhat of a normal existence. So be able to go to the store more often, to be able to start traveling again, and to be able to return to the office. But there's that dependency that Arti mentioned around video analytics to ensure social distancing or temperatures of people using thermal detection. All of that will allow people to move on with their lives. And so it will become an accepted thing. So I think it softens the blow of having to, what some people might see as civil liberties being eroded. It softens the blow of that in some ways and says, this is the benefit of it and this is as far as it goes. So it at least spawns discussions that were never spawned before.
One of the really valuable things that's happening right now are many major news publications have been publishing these amazing infographics, very informative, both in terms of the analysis that they provide of data, whether it be on the spread of the data or sometimes very specific things like how restaurants are recovering in areas that have loosened some of the stay-in-place orders. And in addition to providing nice visualizations of the data, some of the major news publications have been very responsible in also providing captions and context. And it's very heartening in some cases to look at the comment sections associated with some of these infographics as the general public really starts to grapple with what are the benefits and also the limitations of AI and how to contextualize it and use it to make informed decisions while also recognizing that you can go too far in over-interpreting information.
Speaking of informed decisions, to what degree are you seeing the C-suite, the top executives in many businesses, look to their dashboards, start querying data sets in new ways? Are we seeing the innovation at the very top of decision-making as well? Has there been any change in the status quo there?
The C-suite are definitely taking a lot of notice of what's happening in the sense that they're seeing how valuable that data, the aggregation of data is, and how it's forwarding responses to things like this. So they're beginning to look internally at what data sources are available within their own organizations and thinking now about how do we bring this together so we can get a better view of not only the tactical decisions that we have to make, but using the macro environment of data, how do we now start making strategic decisions? And I think the value is being demonstrated for them in plain sight. So rather than having to experiment to see if there's going to be value, there's a full expectation that value will be delivered. And now it's the experiment is how much can I draw from this data now instead?
Arti, anything to offer on the C-suite?
So I think that Glenn put it really well. I would say that it's a little bit early to see how much this is going to change their decision making, especially because, frankly, we are right in a moment when a lot of the C-suite was already exploring AI and opening up to its possibilities in a way they hadn't maybe even a year ago. And so there's a little bit of timing here. It's hard to know which one is the cause and which one is just a coincidence. But for sure, to Glenn's point, they are having to deal with a much more changing and faster evolving environment.
And for the IT organizations, many of them are going to be facing some decisions about where to put their resources. They're going to be facing some budget pressures. But for IT to rise and provide the foundation needed to enable what we've been talking about in terms of AI in different sectors and in different ways, what should they be thinking about? How can AI make sure that they are accelerating the benefits of data science at a time when they need to be a little bit more choosy about how they spend their dollars?
I think with the IT group particularly, they've never had so much focus as they have right now. And probably budgets are responding in a similar sort of way because everyone has to now look at their digital strategy and their digital presence and move as much as they can online to be able to be resistant to pandemics and situations like this that are at risk with storefronts and things like that. So IT has the group that have the sword, if you like, in that battle. They have to fix the digital strategy. They have to deliver on that digital promise. And there's an immediate expectation of customers that things will just be available online. If you look at students in universities, they assume that it'll be a very quick fix we'll just start joining Zoom calls to be able to be lectured that way. When actually there's a much bigger infrastructure that has to sit behind all of those things in order to be able to enable that digital strategy. So there's an AI movement that'll get driven, but purely from the fact that so much more is going to be digitized.
Let's look to some examples and metrics. Where do you see AI and data science really shining? Are there some poster children, if you will, of how organizations, either named or unnamed, are putting AI and data science to use in the pandemic, either to mitigate the crisis or to foster a new normal? Let's start with you, Artie.
It's hard to say right now how these different types of video analytics and CV techniques are going to facilitate reopening in a safe manner, but that's what I've heard about the most at this time in terms of customers adopting AI. I think in general, it's very early stages in terms of how an organization is going to decide to adopt AI. And so for sure, the research community is scrambling to take advantage of this. But for organizations, it's going to take a little bit of time because it always takes a little bit of time to adopt AI into your organization. If you do it right, it can be transformational, but transformational usually means that a lot of things need to change, not just the solution that you've deployed.
Glenn, examples.
There's a plethora of examples from the kind of medical side. So how we've been able to do gene analysis and those sorts of things to be able to understand the virus very quickly. And I think that's well known and well covered. The bit that's less well covered is the AI that's supporting the decision-making by governments and councils and civil bodies. So what I mean by that is they're taking not only the data from how many people are getting sick and how many people are in hospital, which is very important to understand where the disease is, but augmenting that with data from a socioeconomic situation. So you understand where an aging population might live or where a poorer population might live because there's less employment in that area. And so the impact of what will happen to their jobs and the impact of what will happen if they lose transport links and the impact of what will happen if they lose access to healthcare, all of that is being better understood by those models as we go through. So as we're training on not just the health data, but also the economic data and the social data, we have a much better understanding of how society itself will react, which has been guiding the principles that the governments have been using to actually respond. So when people look at the government and say, well, they've come out with one thing and now they're changing their minds, that's normally a data-driven decision, and people aren't necessarily seeing it that way. So AI is playing a massive role in getting society to understand the impact of the virus, not just from a medical perspective, but from everything else as well, and help the people move through that way.
And Glenn, this might be more apparent to the Point Next organization, but how is AI benefiting the operational services side, where either service providers who have been put under tremendous additional strain and demand, or enterprises that are looking for efficiency and adaptability? Are they pointing the AI focus, if you will, at their own internal systems? And how are the data that they're using for running their own operations coming to their aid? Is there an AI ops part of this story?
Absolutely. And there's definitely become a drive towards AI ops. So when you look at an operational organization within an IT group today, it's surprising how much of it is still human-based in the terms that it's a person, an eyeball looking at a graph and then determining a trend from that graph, or the gut feeling that a storage administrator has when they know their system is getting full and they have an idea in the back of their head that last year something happened seasonally from within the organization and making decisions that way. So we're beginning to see systems such as HP's InfoSight start to be more prominent in the way people are making those decisions. So plugging into an ecosystem whereby you can see the trend of your systems over a long time, where you can use AI modeling as well as advanced analytics to understand the behavior of a system over time, and just how the impact of things like everybody suddenly starting to work remotely, what that's doing to the systems from a data perspective. So the models are beginning to catch up a little bit in that sense as well. But absolutely, AI ops is desirable. If it's not there today, it's certainly something that people are pursuing a lot more aggressively than they were before the pandemic.
All right. As we move toward looking to the future and thinking about outcomes, for those organizations that want to be more data-driven, want to do it quickly, but also don't want to go down some dark paths, tripping up in some ways, any words of wisdom with 2020 hindsight? How would you encourage enterprises and small businesses as well to better prepare themselves to use AI and data science? Let's start with you, Ardi.
Whenever I think about an organization adopting AI, I think about not just the AI solution itself, but also all of the organizational processes and, most importantly, the people in an organization, preparing them for the adoption of AI. So a couple of things that I tend to advise organizations that want to use AI and corporate data-driven decision-making is, one, first of all, make sure you're solving a really important problem to your organization. Sometimes the goal of adopting AI becomes more important than the goal of solving some kind of problem. So I always encourage any AI initiative to be focused on really high value efforts. And then, even if it's important, even if you can use your AI solution, AI initiative to do something really valuable to your organization, spend a lot of time thinking about how to make it fit into the way your organization currently works and make it enhance the day-to-day experience of your employees, because at the end of the day, your people are your most valuable asset. And so I think those are important non-technical things, non-specific to the AI solution itself, that organizations should think about if they want the shift to being AI-driven, data-driven to be successful for them. For the AI itself, I always suggest use the simplest possible model, the simplest possible solution, the simplest possible way of analyzing your data that you can. I cannot tell you the number of times where I've heard an organization come in saying that they want to use a very complex AI technique to solve a problem that, if you look at it sideways, you realize could be solved with a checklist or a simple spreadsheet. And so I think the other rule of thumb with AI is keep it as simple as possible, because that will prevent you from incurring a lot of overhead.
Glenn, how should organizations prepare to integrate data science and AI into more parts of their overall planning, management, and operations?
Yeah, so I think I'll echo Arthur. You have to have a use case with an outcome in mind. And it's very, very important that you have a metric that determines whether it's successful or not, and the amount of value you actually add by bringing in AI. Because as Arthur said, a lot of these problems can be solved in multiple ways. AI isn't the only way and often isn't the best way. But just because it exists in that domain, it doesn't necessarily mean it should be used. The second part is AI isn't an on-off switch. It's an iteration. So you can start with something small, and then you can build into bigger and bigger components of that and bring more and more data to bear on the problem, as well as add new features that will then add new functions and outcomes as you move forward. The other part of it is AI is part of an ecosystem. It never exists in isolation. So you don't just drop in an AI system all on its own and it solves a problem. You have to plug it into other existing systems around the business. So it has data sources that feed it so that it can come to some decision. But unless you think about what happens beyond that, so whether it's visualizing something to a human being who'll make a decision, or whether it's automating a decision, really just hiring the smartest person you can find and locking them in a room.
All right. I'd like to close out our discussion with a riff on the adage of you can bring a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. And that means trust in the data outcomes, and that people are thirsty for more analytics and want to use it. How can we perhaps look with some reassurance at the pandemic as having somewhat of a positive impact on AI, in that people want more data-driven analytics and will trust it? How do we encourage the perception to want to use AI, and how is this current environment impacting that? Let's start with you, Ardi, please.
Yeah, so I think that the fact that so many people are checking these trackers of how the pandemic is spreading and learning again through, I will say, a lot of major news publications doing a great job of explaining this, learning through the tracking to see how are stay-in-place orders affecting the spread of the disease in my community. You're starting to see that already. You're starting to see both a growth in the trust of what analyzing data, how data can help make better decisions. And again, as I've mentioned a little bit earlier, a better understanding of what the limitations of data are and a willingness to engage with that and not view data science outputs as black or white types of things. As Glenn mentioned, it's an iterative process, sometimes understanding how to make sense of data and understanding how to build models to interpret the information that's locked in the data. And I think we're seeing that. And I think we're seeing a growing desire to, instead of viewing this as some kind of black box that somewhere sits in some data center and I don't even know where it is, that someone's going to program and it's going to give me a result that will affect me, which for some people might be a positive thing, for other people might be a scary thing. Now people are much more willing to engage with the complexities of data science. And I think that's generally a positive thing for people wanting to incorporate it more in their lives because it becomes more familiar and less other, if you will.
Glenn, perceptions of trust and as an accelerant to the use of yet more analytics and more AI.
I think that the trust is coming from the fact that so many different data sources are out there. So many different organizations have made data available. There's a consistent view of where the data works and where it doesn't. And what that's done is built up the capability of people to accept the fact that not all models will work first time and that experimentation does happen and it is an iterative approach to get to where the end goal. Very often, particularly when I've worked with customers and they've seen that first experiment fall flat because it hasn't quite hit the accuracy that they're looking for, it hasn't quite hit the targets that they're looking for, they'll end the experiment there. Whereas I think we're getting to see in real time on a massive scale that it's all about iteration. It doesn't work the first time. You do need to recalculate and move on, and you do refinement, and you bring in new data sources to get the extra value. What we're seeing throughout this pandemic is that the more data you throw at an instance, the more expertise in data scientists you throw at an instance, the much better the outcome is at the end. So it's not about that first result. It's about the direction of the results and the trend upwards of success.
Well, very good. I'm afraid we'll have to leave it there. We've been exploring how AI and data science are proving impactful and indispensable as business architects chart their new path to a new normal. And we've learned how AI is the indispensable pandemic team member for helping businesses reduce risk of failure and innovate with confidence. So please join me in thanking our guests. We've been here with Artie Garg, Head of Advanced AI Technologies and Solutions at Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. Thank you, Artie.
Thank you.
And we've been here with Glenn Bowden, Chief Technologist for AI and Data at HPE Point Next Services. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Dana.
And a big thank you as well to our audience for joining us for this sponsored Briefings Direct Voice of AI Innovation discussion. I'm Dana Gardner, Principal Analyst at Inter Arbor Solutions, your host for this ongoing series of Hewlett-Packard Enterprise-supported discussions. Thanks again for listening. Please pass this along to your business and IT community and do come back next time.